Hey fam, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kristi. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. Before we get into it, I just want to say trigger warning. We're going to be talking about eating disorders. So if that's something that triggers you, just go ahead and click away. And I will say especially that this video is going to be a little bit more graphic and descriptive than some of my other ones. So definitely if this is a topic that triggers you in any way, don't watch this video. However, if this is content that you enjoy and content that you want to see more of, definitely subscribe to my channel. It really helps. And follow me on Instagram at Kristis_day. But let's get into it.
Close but we're strangers, feel like we're far apart.
So a few weeks ago, I told an overview of my eating disorder story, and I'm going to put a little link up here, like a suggested bar, and you can go watch that. And it just gave a brief overview of my anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, and an overview of how I developed an eating disorder, things like that. In this video though, I'm gonna specifically be talking about my binge eating story. And I'm gonna be making another video actually here pretty soon with my 5 tips on overcoming binge eating. So if that's something you wanna see, then definitely make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss out on that. But let's get into it. And to start, I just want to say that my binge eating was caused by 2 main factors. Number 1, it was a result of restriction. And number 2, it was a result of stressors that were going on in my personal life. So I had been restricting for a number of months before I first binged, and I was rapidly losing weight. I was exercising excessively and compulsively, and thoughts of food were consuming my mind. And at this point, I didn't even realize that there was anything wrong. I didn't realize that I had an eating disorder. In fact, I thought that I was the healthiest I'd ever been, which is ironic on so many levels. But essentially, I didn't know that there was a problem. I started binging my 2nd semester of freshman year in college, and initially my binges started fairly tame, I guess as tame as binges can be. And I started off really just eating forbidden foods. So foods that were on my list of foods that I didn't allow myself to eat. And I would give in and eat those foods. And I was beginning to feel this kind of lack of control. But again, the binges weren't as bad. They got progressively worse, but they started with me eating like random Twinkies. I would eat these Little Debbie Nutty Buddies, I think what they're called, which is kind of funny because I actually don't really care for them that much. I don't really care for the taste, but I remember eating those in my dorm room and I felt so guilty. I would force myself to then go running to compensate for what I'd eaten, or I would tell myself, okay, you ate this tonight, like you're not going to eat sugar for a month and you're going to only eat clean and healthy foods tomorrow. And I would do that to compensate for what I had eaten. And this is why I say my binges started out as tame, because they progressively got a lot worse and I was eating a lot more foods. And my feelings of being out of control just got progressively worse and worse. But this is how they started, and they really started my 2nd semester of college. These more or less tame binges lasted for about a year, and they still were getting worse throughout this year, but they weren't really bad yet. And I was gaining a little bit of weight, but I was compensating enough, like over exercising, restricting. I was doing the overcompensation enough so that my weight gain wasn't terribly noticeable. It wasn't very rapid. By 2nd semester of my sophomore year, things had gotten significantly worse. I was binging a lot more frequently. My binges were really, really bad. I was eating so much food. I was constantly feeling out of control. And I would tell myself after every binge, like, you're never going to do that again. You're not going to have sugar. You're not going to have this food. You're going to go work out extra. You're going to eat less tomorrow. I would wake up every morning and I would tell myself, today is going to be a good day. You're going to only eat healthy foods. You're going to just eat a certain amount. And sometimes I'd binged before the morning was over, and I was starting to binge twice a day. And I can't even describe like the feeling of hopelessness and helplessness after a binge. But I would continue to tell myself, tomorrow's gonna be better. Tomorrow you're gonna get back on track. Tomorrow you're going to, I didn't call it restrict at that time. I know that's what it was now, but back then I would say tomorrow you're just going to eat healthy and you're gonna exercise a lot and you're going to make up for what you've just done. I would beat myself up. I would say, you have no willpower. How could you let this happen? You're gonna get fat again. You're so ugly. And these were the words that I was telling myself and that were constantly in my head. That summer after my sophomore year, I went home, and it was extraordinarily rough. It was probably the worst summer of my entire life. My parents were working a lot, and so I was home alone, and I would just wake up in the morning and I would have good intentions, but at this point I kind of knew that even before the morning would be over, I would binge. And I did, and I would eat so much food, and I remember just lying on my living room floor, so miserable. I was so uncomfortable, and I would lie there for hours because I didn't have the ability to get up and move because I was so depressed. And this is the first summer that I really dealt with hardcore depression. I barely wanted to get out of bed. I could hardly like muster up the strength or courage or willpower to do anything that day. And I remember sitting by the pool. We had a pool, and I would sit outside for hours and I wouldn't do anything. I would just sit there and I would feel miserable, and I had no motivation or energy to do anything. And this is very unlike me because I'm typically an active person. I like to be productive. I like to get stuff done. But during the summer, I was just so unlike me. I was so dead and depressed and miserable. I can't even describe, like if you know, you know, but I can't describe it more than that. And during this time, food was really the only thing that offered any comfort at all. And that just perpetuated the binges. And then of course, after the binges, I would say, you know what, you're not going to eat this again. And what I'm really trying to hone in on here is the cycle of restrict, binge, restrict, repeat ad nauseum. If you take anything from this video, let it be this, like binges follow restriction. And I say that as an overgeneralization. I realize like I'm not trying to put everyone into the same box. So I guess I'm just gonna speak for myself. For me, the binges always followed restriction. And the more I tried to restrict, the more I binged. It was also around this time, especially as I was finishing up my sophomore year in college, that I had anxiety attacks. And this is the first time I'd ever had an anxiety attack before. And I didn't know what was happening to me, but I very clearly remember being in my dorm room and I would try to study and I would just, like my mind would shut down and I just could not handle what was happening. And I'd go into my bed, I would lay there and I'd have my head in a pillow and I was trying to make sense of everything that was happening to me. So all these things were going on at once: anxiety attacks, depression, and the insane binges. And then of course the feelings of needing to compensate for that. I don't remember when I first started purging, but I think it was around this time, my sophomore year. And I realized I'm gonna be descriptive here, but I would try to make myself throw up. I tried this on many different occasions. I wasn't always successful. That was not my primary form of purging. I would stick so many different items down my throat, but I wasn't always successful at making myself throw up. And so I resorted to laxatives. And there was a time that I was taking as many as 7 laxatives at a time or more. I don't remember the exact number, just to purge, because I felt like I needed to do that to compensate for all the food that I was eating. I won't go into like the nitty-gritty details, but I remember that taking those laxatives ended up causing me the most pain I'd ever experienced in my entire life. It was incredibly painful. It was incredibly awful. Like I can't even describe the feelings and what ended up happening to me in my body. I specifically remember one night, it was in the middle of the summer and I had taken all these laxatives and I woke up in the most excruciating pain I can imagine. And I thought I was going to die because I was in so much pain. And I was just lying on my bed and I was going in and out of consciousness. I don't know if I was like passing out or if I was just falling asleep and waking back up. And I was in so much pain, but I couldn't like scream out loud because I didn't want to wake up my parents. And so I was just screaming into my pillow and I was just biting my bed sheets. And I was just wishing for this pain to go away because I was in so much pain. And I have heard later that when you take enough laxatives, it can be equivalent to the pain of giving birth. I don't know if that's true. That's just what I've heard. And if that is the equivalent of giving birth, I don't know that I ever want to give birth. But I just remember I've never been in so much pain in my entire life. And I will remember that night until the day I die, probably. The purging continued on and off, but I was still rapidly gaining weight throughout that summer. It was really bad and continuing into my junior and senior years. Just the binge, restrict, purge, this cycle continued and it was really bad. There were some times that it was less bad than others, but it was really a constant in my life at this time. And the only way I can describe it is as having everything that I wanted being slowly ripped away from me. Like all these body ideals that I'd held for myself, I just was watching them slowly being ripped away and there was nothing I could do about it. And the more I tried to fight it, the worse it got. Like the more I tried to prevent myself from gaining weight, the more weight that I gained, and the more that I binged, and the more I tried to control it, the more I lost control. And I realized this sounds really superficial, and I felt so guilty about it at the time. I was like, how can I care so much about my weight when there are children starving in Africa and when there are child soldiers? And so this guilt was just compiling and making everything worse. And what I realize now, which is not something that I realized at the time, eating disorders are not about vanity. It's not a superficial disease. There are so many other factors that contribute to someone developing an eating disorder. It's not as simple as someone just being too superficial. Like, that is absolutely a major misconception about eating disorders. It is not just about looks. And that's something that I'm realizing now, but it was not something that I understood then. And so the guilt and the shame and everything just made the binging and the restricting and this cycle so much worse. And I genuinely can say, like, this is the most miserable period in my life. And I would not wish this on my worst enemy. I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but again, like, the point that I really want to make is that for me and for a lot of other people, the binging followed the restriction, and the more I restricted, the more I binged. That's something that I did not understand at that time, but it's something that when I did understand it, it made a world of difference in my recovery. So like I said in the beginning, the binging was caused, one, by restriction, and number two, as a reaction to personal stressors that were going on in my life at the time. I don't want to get into everything that was going on in my life at that time. Maybe there will be a point in the future that I feel more comfortable talking about these things, but I do very clearly remember the first time that I turned to food for comfort, and it wasn't really even an intentional thing, but it was my freshman year of university. I was with my then boyfriend, and there was a lot going on in my life, and I remember my boyfriend said that he was gonna go to Taco Bell and he was gonna get food, and he asked me if I wanted anything, and I said, no, I don't want any food. And he was like, are you sure? You know, you haven't really eaten a lot. And I said, no, I do not want any food. Like, don't get me food. And I don't remember, so he left. I don't remember if I like texted him and asked him to get me something in the end, or if he just got me something anyways, but he came back and he had food for me, and I kind of like begrudgingly gave in, and I ate this food, and I remember just feeling comforted, and I remember feeling like I could eat so much. And so I actually ate my food, and I ate some of the food that he'd brought back for himself. And I wouldn't say that was a binge, but it was a clear connection that was made in my mind of the food being comforting and bringing comfort to the stress that was going on in my life. And this feeling of comfort after I ate just continued to get stronger and stronger as I started to binge, and as things became progressively worse in my personal life. Binging was really an out-of-body experience. I can't really describe it in any other way. Like, if you know, you know, but it was a feeling of like a complete lack of control. I felt like I had no control over what I was putting in my mouth. In some sense, I felt like I was kind of floating outside of myself, and I wasn't in the moment, like I wasn't engaged in what was happening. I was almost like an outside observer. It's so weird. Like, I can't describe it any better than that. But these moments, these binges really took my mind off of what was going on in my life at the time. And this respite from the stress became really addictive. And so I started turning to food if I was stressed about school or work, or if I was overwhelmed, or if I was feeling any strong emotion. If I was feeling helpless or worthless, I turned to food. And these binges continued until, well, I'll just be completely honest. Like, this is not something that I've completely overcome. I am so far on this journey of recovery. Like, looking back, I'm so thankful to where I am now, but I can't say that I completely stopped binging. What I will say is that the binges are way less severe. I almost want to say like they're not full binges. Maybe they're on the border of overeating / binging. I do feel in some sense that feeling of lacking control, but not near to the extent that I used to. And these episodes are so much more rare these days. And speaking of, I think now is a good time to really define what binging is versus overeating. So the Mayo Clinic describes binging as eating unusually large amounts of food in a specific amount of time. So maybe over like 1 or 2 hour period, feeling that your eating is out of control, eating even when you're full, or not hungry, eating rapidly during these episodes, eating until you're uncomfortably full, frequently eating alone or in secret, feeling depressed, disgusted, guilty, ashamed, and upset after you're eating and about your eating, and frequently dying, possibly without losing weight. So the Mayo Clinic contrasts the binge eating with overeating, and the way they describe overeating is this. They say almost everyone overeats on occasion, such as having seconds or thirds of a holiday meal, but for some people, excessive overeating that feels out of control and becomes a regular occurrence might cross the line to binge eating disorder. Other definitions of overeating include feeling uncomfortably full or bloated, feeling gassy, swollen, things like that are signs of overeating. But I think that the main difference is the binge eating is often characterized by this feeling of like being completely out of control, like almost this out of body experience, and the secret eating, the eating rapidly, the shame, guilt, all these negative emotions associated with binge eating. So those are kind of the differences between binge eating and just overeating. So the episodes, the times that I've struggled more recently, I would say they're probably somewhere between those two, because they're nowhere near like as bad as my terrible binges in the past, like a couple years ago, but they're also, I think they're a little more than just overeating. But these things happen a lot more rarely now, like they're not a common occurrence. And I really started getting better about 9 months ago when I moved out of my parents' place and I had that space and that mental space to kind of focus on recovery. Not that it happened overnight. It's not like I moved out and I was cured. It took a long time, but over the last 9 months, I have seen huge improvements, and I'm so thankful for where I am today. And like I said before, I am working on a video with my 5 tips. I do 10. I'm like, my 5 tips. No, my 5 tips to recover from binge eating. That should be going up here pretty soon. So definitely make sure that you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss out on that video. Yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I feel like I'm gonna go into a bit of a vulnerability hangover because this is something that's really hard to talk about. And this is, I think, the first video that I've really gotten into some of the nitty-gritty details of the things that I've done and that I've gone through. So I really hope that you were able to get something from this. If you enjoy this type of content, again, subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Instagram at Kristi's_day, and I just talk about my life and stuff like that on my Instagram. So if that's something that's interesting to you, just go ahead and follow, and I'll see you in my next video.